Unless your sense of style stopped developing after G1 Decepticons, it can be hard to build an aesthetically pleasing PC on a budget. There's a fine line between classic minimalism and stark utilitarianism, and it usually seems like the only way of crossing that line is with a shitload of money. For most gamers and PC enthusiasts, performance and price take positions 1 and 2 in the hierarchy of needs, and to many of you, the idea of sacrificing overall value for the sake of style might seem, well, dumb. What I've built here then is a pretty dumb PC. It's not my most powerful, nor my cheapest, nor my best value. It is, however, the prettiest I could build for the price. I've been aching to make a white themed build for years, but each PC component seems to have their own season for offering a white option, and they don't often line up with each other. Therefore, what I have here is kind of a mishmash of components from across several product generations, along with some brand new stuff. For a motherboard, I knew I wanted a modern platform that wouldn't break the bank. After some hunting around, I picked up an Asrock Taichi X370 from eBay for £90. A bit excessive for an older chipset, but much cheaper than even the best prices I found on MSI or NZXT's white options, and more modern and less sketchy than the AliExpress X99 boards. The Taichi has integrated Wi-Fi, great power delivery, and after a UEFI update now supports up to Zen 2 processors. Which brings me onto the CPU, a Ryzen 5 3600. Even a couple of years on from its release, this stands out as a great value CPU for gaming and productivity, and at just £125 it was pretty much a no-brainer. To keep a 3600 cool, I'd usually just pull a Wraith Stealth off the small pile I seem to have acquired, but in keeping with the build theme, I picked up a V-True V5 tower cooler for £27 instead. My usual source for good value RAM is Sex, a used component retailer here in the UK. Alas, buying memory from their site is something of a crapshoot. You get told the capacity, clock speeds and form factor, but not specifics about brand or model. Rather than roll the dice over and over until I got lucky, instead I picked up a pretty good deal on a new 16GB kit of white Crucial Ballistics 3200. The case is from my personal favourite category, that of cheap yet preem. Antec hasn't always been the best brand for cases, but this one certainly has its positive points. The NX410 is rather well featured. It includes a pair of 140mm intake fans, a 120mm exhaust, a mesh front and hinged tempered glass side. On paper, this is a phenomenal spec for £55, and its understated aesthetics are pretty much the ideal fit for this build. However, there were a few hiccups. The supplied fans are indeed ARGB, but they're controlled using a switch on the case, are powered by 4-pin Molex, and have effectively only one speed. This is one of the trade-offs with suspiciously cheap cases, and one you'd think I'd have gotten used to by now. The problems stacked up further because of my choice of motherboard and CPU cooler. The V-True also comes with an ARGB fan, but it's controlled by much more modern motherboard connectors that my old X370 simply doesn't have. While I could have left the cooler unlit, I didn't want to leave the build effectively unfinished, so I picked up a V-True ARGB fan kit which, as well as 3 120mm ARGB fans, has a fan hub which also connects to the button on the case, meaning all 4 120mm fans can have their lighting controlled with the push of a button or via the supplied remote. For storage, I'm using a 256GB OEM Samsung NVMe SSD and a 2TB WD hard drive, and power is provided by a 650W EVGA PSU with some cheap white cable extensions I picked up on Amazon. Onto the GPU, and this is something of a sore point. This was going to be an £850 build, featuring a white Zotac RTX 3060 I'd found for close to MSRP. But after having my order cancelled and hunting around for several weeks for a replacement, I decided to give up on that idea and lower the bar a little. The Asus GTX 1060 3GB kind of sums up the entire build philosophy here. I know I'm paying for more than I'm getting, and it kills me to have done it anyway. From a glass half full perspective, the 1060 is not a terrible GPU in itself, though the 3GB frame buffer is extremely limiting. So, after all that, I guess you probably want to see some bench. 1080 High is, for the most part, a 60fps experience in Jedi Fallen Order. Frame times spike frequently, though this seems to be something of a flaw in the game design. This time round I installed the game directly to the SSD, which is likely why the 1% lows are so much higher than they were on my previous build, which ran the game from the hard drive. Live and learn, folks. This isn't just new for my benchmarking videos, but actually new for me, period. I bought Death Stranding in the EGS sale last Christmas and haven't got round to playing it yet, but I'm seriously impressed so far. 1080 medium was all that was needed for a 72fps average and 58fps 1% lows, though I did have to drop the memory streaming budget to low in order to accommodate the 1060's 3GB frame buffer. Also, I couldn't help but notice a lot of tearing during cutscenes, and it was really distracting. I don't use VSync for benchmarks, but in gameplay I'd highly recommend it. Awkwardly, this PC loses out to the cheaper build by a couple of frames on average in Control, coming in at under 45fps at 1080 medium settings. I'd guess that dropping to low might be sufficient for a 60fps experience, and sure enough, doing so here gives an average of 66.6 and 1% lows of 55.5. In the last build video, I rationalised testing Immortals Fenyx Rising at 1080 high settings because Breath of the Wild runs at 30fps on the Switch, but I know you PCMR folks like your higher frame rates, and 45fps wasn't going to cut it. Dropping to 1080 medium gets us almost to 60fps average, and I dare say dropping quality to low or reducing resolution scaling should just push things over the line. Alternatively, if you grew up in a PAL region, you should already be used to 50Hz, so just deal with it. Valorant is, of course, a CPU test more than anything. In my previous builds, a quad-core Xeon with a GTX 670 scored 100fps, a Ryzen 1500X and GTX 1650 scored 135, a Ryzen 3100 with an R9 270X managed 172. Thanks to the Ryzen 5 3600, this build scored 195fps on average and 123 1% lows. A better graphics card wouldn't be of any help here, so if you want a locked 1080 144Hz experience in Valorant, you need to look at overclocking or upgrading the CPU rather than the GPU. I had to rush through the benchmarks on this video. As is so often the case, I had listed the PC for sale before I'd finished making the video, and sure enough, it sold. This is why I only had time for 5 games. If you want to see more of how the 1060 3GB holds up in 2021, I have that video linked below. If I'm honest with myself, this build was brought down by my own hubris. I spent a lot of time and more money than I wanted to on aesthetics, but the compromises I was forced to make meant its performance doesn't match my original ambitions. A few weeks back I posted a £420 build that had a crappy case, terrible lighting, and a first gen quad-core Ryzen, but with its superior GPU, it performs on par with this build in most titles, and the cheaper B450 motherboard even had Zen 3 compatibility. On reflection, a 6GB 1060 would have been a better fit for the modern age, and would have meant that I had at least beaten the £420 PC for gaming performance. Of course, a 3060 or 3060 Ti at their retail price would have been the best option all round, but we certainly don't live in that world. Let me know what you'd have done differently in the comments. I'm sure someone will have some idea that'll make me kick myself for not having thought of it. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.